So apart from the tradition of taking tea and biscuits or cake, what else have we actually been given by our ancestors? You know, those ones quite near, Victorians, or even further back, the Romans. What have they contributed to us as horticulturalists? Anything that can happen in the garden. Let's have a little look in this video as to what we use today that they have given to us. Hello, I'm Rosie Hardy. This is Rosie Hardy Gardening. If you enjoy our videos, please do subscribe to the channel. When you look back in history of horticulture, you can see that there's an awful lot that we still use today, or we think, oh, we've thought about this, and then you realise, actually, no, it's already been used. We are just adapting things that our ancestors used to do. We may be doing it in a slightly different way, but the techniques are still what they actually were doing. So what am I talking about? So in a lot of old greenhouses, you would go in and you would see water tanks underneath the floor with metal grids all the way going along. Now, some of this was basically because they wanted to catch the water, and a lot of people think, oh, it's dip tanks and you can put your watering can in and you can get it out and pour it all over your plants. That wasn't the main reason for having this water stored underneath the actual greenhouses. A lot of it was for cooling in the summer and keeping a little bit of a moist atmosphere within the greenhouse itself, but also it helps with maintaining a slightly higher temperature in the winter as well. So a very, very good bit of engineering. And in the slightly bigger places, then quite often that water would then go into be used in the heating system, to be used around the pipes that were heating the greenhouses as well, but that's a much bigger idea. So the idea of having water in there just to keep it cooler in the summer and warmer in the winter, because water stays at an ambient temperature, especially if it's in tanks lower down. So that is one thing within these greenhouses, etc. But what you have to remember is that orangeries and growing houses with open windows and that sort of thing have been around for a long, long time. So at Ham House in the UK, for instance, there is a very old orangery. The orangery in Ham House dates back to 1670, so that's going back a long time, which shows that people were trying to grow protected crops for a lot longer than we have really realised, and we are just working on that and creating new types of buildings that we can use to help extend the growing season. It's nothing new, it's always been done, and you know, we've just made it slightly more modern, using more modern techniques, more modern equipment, and basically, you know, using glass or polythene, etc., so that we have got these houses for growing and extending the season. Unlike a greenhouse, lath houses are something that a lot of people will utilise and use. And these are open to the elements because you've got these laths and they go horizontally across, and that's the best way. If they're vertical, it gets too wet inside the actual house. So they're along, and there is about a 5 centimetre gap between each lath, and they go down, and you're making this, it can be either a lean-to type structure against a wall and coming down. It creates a huge amount of shade, which is very good in areas where you've got a lot of sun and you need to create more shade. So that is one thing. And because they're open to the elements and the rain and water will get in as well, they also provide quite a moist environment. So they are brilliant for growing ferns and that type of thing, and orchids, etc. So they are something which has been used again for a long time by our ancestors. And a lot of people think, oh look, we've made this new idea. No, we haven't. But what we're doing with them is we're making them look more presentable. We're utilizing materials which means that they are buildings that are put there to look really pretty. They are great, but they have a functionality as well. So these are something that, you know, you can use. So if you are struggling with a lot of sun, then think about a lath house, because it will last a lot longer than something that you put up with, say, netting. So if you're using wooden laths and making it, but remember, horizontal laths, and basically the lath should be the same width as the gap between the next one. So 5cm laths, 5cm gap, and that will give you a really good shade. It will also protect against the wind, because not only are you doing the roof, you're doing the side, you can do the end, and you can have an open end if you know it's not too windy from one direction, or you can have it so there's a doorway on there as well. Very, very useful and easy to make. You know, you will see some of these lath plates, and they're not done with milled timber. They're using things. So for instance, here in the UK where we are, we could use hazel sticks and just make them out of hazel sticks, and it would work just as well. Wouldn't perhaps last as long, but it's still a functional building for the time that you need, and you just repair as you go along. So those are really useful as shade houses. What else do we actually utilize now, which is a very old technique? Well, one of those is hotbeds. Now, I don't mean the new modern hotbeds where you put an equivalent of an electric blanket underneath and then put things on. What I'm talking about is the old technique of getting rotting manure, putting a layer of that at the base of maybe a cold frame or maybe a raised bed, using that, covering it with maybe a soil or straw or some other thing, and then putting either bare root stock or potted stock all on there, and just basically warming it all up, and then having a covering over the top to keep that warmth coming in. And this is, you know, this used to be used for growing pineapples out of season. It was used for getting strawberries into fruit out of season as well. And it works really well. So it is something, if you don't have any heating or a way to heat say a greenhouse or something like that, then a simple hotbed like that, utilizing the warmth and the heat from rotting manure, will really work well with your material. Once you keep it moist, it will keep on producing and creating more warmth. Just be careful you don't have it too moist, because that can affect how your plant material that you've put in there then grows. But moisture on that rotting material will keep it producing, and you will be surprised at how much warmer that will be. And it's a really good way of getting basal heat into the roots and keeping those pots warm so that it will start growing. Have a try. There's another thing which is similar to the hotbeds, and that is plunge beds. But the plunge beds are used in a slightly different way. So you're not putting in a manure base at the bottom to create heat. What you're doing is you're creating these beds, which could be anywhere between sort of 10 inches and 15 inches high, depends on what you're wanting. And usually they are filled with sand. So what you would do is you would have a nice layer of sand as the base. You then put, and this is a very, very old technique for people who grow a lot of bulbs in containers, and you just fill it all up, absolutely pot thick, right the way through all of the raised bed, and then you throw sand over the top of it, a gritty sand, so quite a coarse sand, and you throw that right over the top so that everything is covered, and they're covered over the tops of the pots by probably an inch, so 4 or 5 centimeters. You'll be able to see the labels. Make sure any labels that you've got in your pots are tucked in quite well, because the action when you come to dig them out in the spring, you be very careful, you might end up getting a label mixed up. And if you've got your absolutely prized bulbs in there, you do not want to mix up your labels. So that's it. Or do 2 labels, put one tucked right down and one slightly higher up. That's another way of doing it. But this is a really great way, because then when they're all tight like that and they're within this container, again, it is just that bit warmer. It will keep them all constant, so they won't get that up and down effect, and it works really well. And there are a lot of nurseries still today who still use this technique of plunging pots. Now, it doesn't have to be in sand, that's the traditional way of doing it. You can plunge into compost as well, but you've got to be very, very careful that you've got something which isn't degrading. So if you're using, say, a modern day peat free compost, that type of thing, then that's still sort of breaking down. It will give off a bit too much heat, so you don't really want to use that. You want to use something which is, you know, you can use old, really old compost or something, such things, and basically whatever you've got available, but it works quite well. You could use dry straw. If you're going to use dry straw, just make sure that you cover everything over with maybe newspaper, just so that the straw, if there's a little bit of seed or something, doesn't get in. Be careful if you're using something like straw that, one, you don't get seed going into the pots, because that's really annoying. So cover all your pots with, say, newspaper or cardboard, and then put that over. You're already talking about an insulating layer. Just be a little bit careful with straw, because sometimes it can have agricultural chemicals on it which are not good for plant material. So just be a little bit careful on what you use there. But anything that you can use as an insulating material is really good. Chipped bark maybe, or even sawdust shavings like that. You can create a bed for all of those lovely pots, and they don't have to be huge big beds. You can do it in just a box. So a good old-fashioned esky, you know, a freezer box, if you put stuff into that and then cover up, don't put the lid on, because you don't want it to not have air going in there, but that works just as well. Now, the one thing that I haven't mentioned, and is also something that would be a technique that we still use today, and that is rhubarb forcers. Now, a lot of people will see these beautiful pots that you can get, you know, these lovely clay pots that go over your rhubarb crown, have a lid on the top, absolutely wonderful. So this is, again, is a very old technique, and here in the UK we have something called the rhubarb triangle, which is up in Yorkshire, where there are low growing sheds where the rhubarb roots are lifted from the fields. They are put in absolutely root thick right the way through in these buildings. These buildings are warmed up, and then you can go in the dark. You take a candle in when you're doing the actual pulling of the rhubarb, and you get these beautiful stalks of rhubarb. Lovely yellow leaf, the colour of my jacket here, and the pink stems, and that is the forced rhubarb that you will see in your actual supermarkets for you to buy. And rhubarb is a really good thing for you to eat. Now, back in the day when I was a student, I'm going back a long time here, I actually wrote a 10,000 word thesis on rhubarb about how the industry up in Yorkshire was actually failing. It has come back because rhubarb got brought back by all of the chefs going, this is a wonderful product to use, not just as a dessert, but you can use it in other cooking, etc. So it's amazing how a product that sometimes goes into decline can be brought back up by another industry, and that is great. Now, rhubarb forcing, you do not have to go out and spend a fortune on those beautiful pots. Yes, they're beautiful. If you can find one which hasn't got a crack in it, wonderful. There are new ones made as well. But an old dustbin works just as well. So you can either just have the dustbin without the lid and turn it upside down over, and then just put some bricks on the top of it, absolutely no problem. Or you can take the base out of it and slide it over the top, put the lid on, because then you can actually look in to see how the rhubarb is doing. And again, put some bricks on the lid just to hold it there, and that'll be fine. So that's a lot easier way. But that is an old-fashioned way of getting an early crop out of something which is really good for you. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please do subscribe to the channel. If you want to watch another video of mine, YouTube thinks this one is perfect for you.